And just very quickly, ladies, I just want to make sure you're able to see mine.
Yes.
Yes.
My full screen. Okay,
Nice.
perfect.
Oh,
Great.
Okay. I know we have one more minute here.
The joys of Photoshop.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sharon Bonney. I am the Executive Director for the Coalition on Adult Physical Education, and I'm really excited to welcome you to our webinar today. We have over 539 registered, and we have Dr. Carmen Stewart, who's going to be our lead presenter today, along with Robert Breitbard from Burlington English. I'm going to turn it right over to Robert, and then he's going to turn it back to me. I'm going to share real quickly about a couple great initiatives we have going on. But I'll turn this to Robert, and he could say a few words about Burlington English. And I want to say before he does, the reason why we're able to enjoy these wonderful webinars free of charge for our members is because of their sponsorship. So thank you so much, Robert, for your sponsorship.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to everybody. Thank you to Sharon, the entire COA board. Very much looking forward to hearing Dr. Stewart's presentation today. And for all of you who were able to join in at COAB in New Orleans just a couple weeks ago, again, congratulations to everyone involved with COAB, all participants, for making an amazing event. I have to give a huge shout out to our central team, Sherry Quinnell and her entire team, and Vicki Denkus and our marketing, just our booth. For anybody who was there, it was just quite the place to be. So again, looking forward, setting my watch, looking forward to seeing you all in Baltimore. But again, big congratulations to everyone and all the heavy lifting of everyone involved with COA. For today, for reading strategies, couldn't find a better topic and a better time to talk about, to introduce what Burlington has to offer for things like this. If you haven't seen Burlington before, well, you really owe it to yourself to visit us at BurlingtonEnglish.com. We are the most comprehensive. We offer everything from the basics all the way to advanced, EL Civics, the integration of EL Civics, IELCE, prep for IET, more than 40 career-specific modules, CASAS preparation practice, all the career exploration and soft skills that WIO is asking for. And what we'll spotlight briefly here and maybe towards the end is our digital library when we're talking about talking about reading comprehension. And something that people ask us all the time, what is the Burlington blend? And that's the amazing thing, that Burlington just separates itself from any other type of product out there. I should know, I was customer number 4 as a local director here in Florida, more than coming up on almost 30 years now in adult education as a teacher and as a director. And Burlington offers, not just in the lab with our student zone, at a distance, everybody on their mobile device. Recently our speech trainer was just added to our mobile application, so the usage is right through the roof, but also worksheets. But our big thing of where we shine is for teachers with very little preparation time, or even full-time teachers with lots of prep. Our in-class lessons are invaluable. And then as we lead into what Dr. Stewart's going to be talking about, we have just an amazing collection of high-interest readers, both fiction and nonfiction. Really, really grab the students, and they can be accessed anywhere, anytime. So when we're talking about reading comprehension, so neat to a few months ago during ML King Day, the district I was in was doing a book club reading for the entire district of Gandhi, and all the kind of reading comprehension and different activities and CCRS that they can pull from reading high interest readers. So with that, thank you to all. I'll see you at BurlingtonEnglish.com. And with that, turn it back over to Sharon, Bethel, and Dr. Stewart. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quickly. I just want to go through a few quick things so that everybody is aware of what's going on here at COA. And before I do, maybe you can take a minute here to put your name and where you're from in the chat box, so we know that everybody that's joining us here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, I want to welcome you to our webinar today, 10 Reading Strategies that Support Comprehension. I'd like to share a little bit about our mission, which is to inspire educators so adults succeed and communities thrive, and we do that through leadership, professional development, advocacy, and communication. Next, I want to let you know about our award-winning National Public Awareness Campaign. We see 6 here. We've actually won 7 national awards with that. And that really was what helped us to stave off $87 million in funding cuts and successfully add $60 million. But I just want to mention that we actually need your help now. As you probably are aware, there's $158 million of proposed funding cuts through the Trump administration. And we all need to stand up for adult education. So if you've not done so, please go to educateandelevate.org, and there's a big button at the top that says Take Action. And let's add our voice so that they know that adult education matters. You can also submit success stories. These are super important because legislators and funders ask us for those all the time. So please take a minute, submit your adult learner, workforce partner, and state innovation success stories. Next, I just want to mention that we do have national awards. We give out over $40,000 annually. You can see there Teacher of the Year, Administrator of the Year, Adult Learner of the Year, State Innovations, Workplace and Advocate. We also give out scholarships and incentive grants as well. We'll be hitting the Hill coming up here. We've had almost 400 visits with legislators and their staff. So on May 6th and 7th, we will be in Washington, D.C. If you're interested in joining us, we'd love to have you. We're going to be talking face-to-face with legislators at this really critical time when there's 100+ new House of Representative legislators. So we want to encourage you to join us if you can there on the Hill. Also, this is one of more than 50 webinars we deliver annually on trending topics. Our goal really is to take the professional development outside the brick and mortar of our national conference. And we also provide CEUs as well. And this is free thanks to our wonderful sponsors who underwrite these webinars. Last year we had a virtual conference. It was our 3rd conference. We had 1,500+ join us. And we had more than 10,000 downloads. I just want to encourage you all, that will be coming up in the fall shortly. We'd love for you to join us as well for that. We have an adult learner membership option, which is free. If you're a local program director, you can join all of your adult learners, and there's a number of benefits they get, such as our award-winning ambassador program, which is rolled out to 28 states. These ambassadors are trained in how to talk with legislators and funders, and then they join us in Capitol Hill. So love for you to join us. If you're interested in that, you can encourage your adult learners to join us for that. We also have our national conference coming up in 2020, April 5th through 8th in Baltimore, Maryland. We'll have an adult learner strand, which we're really excited about, and we hope you'll join us for that and the 36 other strands that we'll be holding. COABE recently launched a new journal. As you can see, we've got a Career Pathways edition, a Prison Literacy edition, and now coming up soon, our Leadership edition. We had more than 11,000 downloads for our Career Pathways edition. Prison Literacy Edition has been super popular with over 6,000 downloads as well at this point. And now we're accepting, May 1st, we'll be accepting submissions for our Leadership Edition. So if you're interested in writing for the journal, now's your opportunity. COABE really prides ourselves in being a convener of partners. We have 42 national partners and 47 state partners. Included in these national partners are our new workforce partners, Amazon, Napa Auto Parts, Skills USA, Google, Tyson Foods, Chamber of Commerce, as well as the U.S. Department of Education. We have 23,000 active members and 65,000+ contacts. I just wanted to very briefly talk about Tyson and Amazon. So with Amazon, we've worked with them to remove barriers to employment. If you have adult learners that would like to make between $15 and $19 an hour, plus retirement, this is an excellent opportunity for them. So contact me, Sharon Bonney, for more information, because Amazon has removed a number of barriers so that they can not only be employed there, but also access the career choice, which they will pay 80% of their college education. Or if they prove that they're a solid worker and they want to go into management, they'll remove the barrier for the bachelor's degree, which is typically what they would need to go into this program. So lots of exciting things going on there. Tyson has rolled out a literacy program to all 43 of their plants across the nation, and we're partnering with them on that as well. We also partner with Justice U, who is an anti-trafficking, human trafficking organization, and they provide badges and credentials, which we'll be happy to talk with you about if you're interested. We're also engaged with the Adult Literacy X Prize Community Competition, and we will be having a webinar very shortly, and we hope that everybody on this webinar will join us for that as well. It's a great way to use an app to get your adult learners at the lowest levels move on to the higher levels. And then I also want to take a minute here to talk about a wonderful partnership with Google. Here you can share your adult learner success stories, and you can also sign up for a boot camp training. We'll be delivering boot camps across the country, so if you're interested, just send me an email, sharonbonnie@coabe.org. We'll be delivering boot camps in all 50 states, and it's everything from how to open up a Gmail account, how to write a budget, how to come up with an entrepreneurial plan, lots of really exciting digital skills that we'll be sharing out. So as I mentioned, this webinar is made possible with the support of Burlington English, the publisher that cares. We're really delighted for their partnership and sponsorship in this. And now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Carmen Stewart, who is our webinar presenter of the day. So Dr. Carmen, I'd love to turn this over to you. And while you're pulling that up, I hope that everybody is introducing themselves over in the chat box.
Okay. Can everyone see my slideshow on the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Well, so first I just want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to do this, and thanks again to Burlington English for sponsoring this session. So this session is 10 reading strategies that support comprehension, and I'm going to dive right in because I have a lot to cover and we don't have a whole lot of time. So first I want to talk about what we mean by comprehension, and then I'll talk a little bit about teaching and comprehension, the strategies that effective independent readers use, which is what we want to get all of our readers toward, and then those top 10 strategies. I'll talk a little bit about text structures and patterns within the top 10 strategies as well. So the first thing is I want to make sure that we have a common definition of what we mean by comprehension. So if you can use your chat box and tell me, how would you define comprehension? How would you define comprehension? And I'd like to share a story of a professional developer who went into an elementary school able to make sense out of what she read. And I already see one person understanding what to read. And the little girl was exasperated, and she said, everyone keeps asking me if I can make sense out of what I'm reading. My mom asked me, my teacher asked me, now you're asking me. But you know what? No one ever tells me what makes sense means. So I don't want to talk about comprehension when we don't have a real definition of that. So I'm seeing reading and processing what you've read, the ability to understand what you're reading, the ability to understanding what I read, being able to read text and summarize it. So, okay, great. So a lot of people have ideas about what comprehension means. And typically we tend to think of it as us being able to take information in. But as someone noted, you also need to be able to use that. So how can I use this to summarize or to make better decisions? And so the goal of comprehension isn't just for students to take information in, but then to be able to use that information for themselves. So that's my definition. Being able to understand what it is that you're reading, and then being able to use that either to explain it to others or to apply it to something that you need for your career, for your family, for your finances. So I want to talk a little bit about teaching and comprehension because I think it's important for us to reflect on our practice, particularly when we're trying to use research-based strategies. Our definition of insanity is to do the same over and over and expect a different result. We often do that in our practice of a for study. I surveyed teachers all over the state of Ohio.
Dr. Carmen, I'm so sorry to bother you. Is anybody else does it seem to be kind of going in and out with the internet access here? Is anybody else having difficulty with this?
Yes, that's the same here.
They're saying it for all panelists. Yeah, okay. Yes.
So, Dr. Carmen, is there any other internet access maybe that you have that we could tap on? I just want to make sure people can access this, can listen to what you're saying and hear what you're saying.
So let me just see. I am on the only network I actually have access to. Let me think. Okay, they're saying it's been that way from the beginning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Can anyone hear me?
We can hear you. It's just that it goes in and out. The audio, it kind of seems unstable and it goes in and out.
Okay, it has been doing that since the beginning for me as well. When you were speaking, I'm not exactly sure. Is there a call-in number that I can use so that it's through my phone and not the service?
Yep, I can give you a call-in number right now.
Okay, let's do that.
But then you'll also still need to be able to show your you'll still need to be able to show your screen, right?
Yeah, I can still show me. I just don't want them to hear, and I'll mute this screen once I'm on the audio so they're not getting an echo.
Okay. Just one moment here. I'm trying to.
Okay.
So Dr. Carmen, in that email that I sent you just a little while ago, it's going to have the phone number. I'm going to resend that to you because it's a specific one you call into.
Okay.
So I just resent it. And to everybody that's waiting, I apologize. We just want to make sure you can hear Dr. Carmen on this video.
Okay. Let's see if I can. Waiting on your email to come through. It's a different number for the presenter.
Right.
Okay, let's see. Oh, you know what? Here's Mariah's email. I'll just try the number that's. Okay. 646-568-8656.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me dial into that number.
Thank you to everybody that's chatting with us in the chat side here. We appreciate that.
Followed by pound.
Okay.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound. You have entered the meeting as a panelist.
Can you hear me?
Attendees can now hear you speak. This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Can you all hear me now?
We can, yes. Dr. Carmen, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Gosh, it's going to be muted either way. Okay. Are you getting an echo now, or is that better?
That's good. I can hear you now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So to go back to when I surveyed teachers across the state of Ohio, and most of them stated that their main tool of education is worksheets. And so what a lot of them, when I would ask, so what do you do with your worksheets? How do you actually engage students in instruction with that? Okay, great, perfect. Audio's better. And so typically what instructors said is that they would give students the packet, the students would read the information on the packet, they would answer any comprehension questions, and then they would turn those in, and the instructors would grade them, or the students would grade them themselves. And then the next step was to get yet another packet. The problem with that is that when we give students packet after packet after packet, all they're doing is practicing the skills that they already have. And what they actually need is for us to do some intervention in between one packet and the next to improve their strategies. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, things that you can do that can help students to connect to the content that they're reading more directly, tools that will help them learn how to comprehend and make sense of text. And so it's not the same example over and over. So I like to use a medical analogy because I think it kind of drives the point home a little bit as well. But consider that you were ill and you went to the doctor, you had a fever and you were just feeling really terrible. And you went to the doctor and the doctor took your temperature. When the doctor takes your temperature, he says, yes, oh my gosh, you definitely are ill, you have a fever. And just sends you home and tells you to come back the next day without doing any intervention. The next day, you're likely going to still be ill. So you go back and he's going to take your temperature again and again. Yes, you'll have a fever, but he hasn't told you what's wrong with it, and he hasn't told you what to do about it. And that's essentially what we do when we provide students with activity after activity after activity, but don't provide any kind of intervention in between to move them from where they are skill-wise to closer to where we want them to be. So before we really jump into comprehension, I want to talk about the fact that there are actually 5 different components to reading. And this image, the text on this image should actually be flipped, because phonemic awareness is really the foundation of reading, so it should really be at the bottom. But phonemic awareness is a student's understanding that the letters of our language, the 26 letters of our alphabet, which we refer to as graphemes, that those 26 letters all make up 44 different sounds. And phonemic awareness is when students recognize those letters and know the different sounds that those letters make. So for example, they know that the C can make a K sound or an S sound, right? So students need to have that phonemic awareness, and often we find that students don't necessarily have that. But that is a foundational skill for reading, because if a student doesn't have phonemic awareness, then they're going to struggle with decoding words or making sense out of new words that they don't recognize, which is where phonics comes in. Phonics is when we know the sounds of a language from our phonemic awareness, and we're able to build those sounds together. So the phonemic awareness is knowing that a C makes a K sound. The phonics awareness is knowing that a C and an A and a T together makes the word cat. And phonics is actually a skill that a lot of our students don't have, actually a skill that a lot of teachers don't have, because depending on when you were educated, we were either phonics was the thing in education or phonics was not the thing in education. But phonics is really one of the most effective tools for helping students learn how to decode many words frequently instead of having to rely on their memories. Once a student has that skill, the next thing is focusing on fluency. So I am actually the program director of a program here in Cleveland called Seeds of Literacy, and we provide adult literacy instruction, GD preparation or HSC preparation for anyone from non-readers to folks who already have a credential and are trying to transition to post-secondary or workforce. And one of the things that we started doing is assessing all of our students on fluency if they test below a certain level in our program. And the reason for that is fluency is the rate and accuracy that we read with. So a student who is not a fluent reader, when they read, it sounds very slowly and not at the pace of conversational speech. So I have an amen corner here in the chat. Okay, so students who don't read fluently are not going to comprehend what it is that they're reading. And the reason for that is that reading fluency is when we're reading at a conversational pace. If a student reads super slowly, it means that a lot of their working memory, a lot of their brain is so focused on understanding the individual words that there's nothing left for understanding the actual passage. And I'll give an example. When most of us read, if we're reading a sentence that has a question mark at the end, before we see that question mark, our voice is already going up as though we're asking a question. And it's doing that because we know that that question mark is at the end, because we're focusing on the entire sentence and not just on the individual words. Our students who are not fluent readers are still focusing on the individual words, and so they're missing the bigger picture because their focus is on decoding individual words. So if a student is not reading fluently, they're not going to get to comprehension, and so they will, well, and I won't say they won't get to it, but they'll struggle and it'll be choppy. Vocabulary is another area that can be very challenging for students. It can present barriers to comprehension. And the reason for that is that often vocabulary words are connected to the concepts that we're trying to teach. So for a student who is reading science or social studies, if they're missing key vocabulary words, they're also missing key parts of the concept. So I did see a question asking if a student can be a fluent reader but not be very good at reading aloud. Absolutely. If a student has anxiety around reading out loud, which a lot of students do if they weren't the best readers in elementary and had to do that round robin reading out loud, they absolutely can have difficulties with reading out loud. But the fluency assessment allows us to see exactly what it is that what is happening with the student that's keeping them from getting to comprehension. In the December 2016 Journal of Research and Practice, researchers from Georgia State University did fluency assessments for students. And because so many of the fluency assessments that are out, or because really all of them that are out, are designed for K-12 students and really early elementary students, they aren't really accurate, and that's what the researchers in that journal article found, that they're not really accurate for reaching adult learners, but they really are the best thing that's out there. They really are the only tool that we have. And so it is helpful and useful for us to use the ones that are currently available. So someone's asking which ones do we use. We use one, and yes, it does, fluency does also pertain to Spanish readers as well. So we use a tool called Graded Passages, which I have not been able to find. I'm not been able to find electronic copies of it. I downloaded it maybe 13 years ago, and I just use it because it really does, it goes to K from 1st grade through 12th grade, but there are a couple of tools that are out on the market. Florida, the state of Florida has a Florida Oral Reading Fluency Assessment that is really, really good. The directions are there, it's simple, it's clear, it's easy to learn how to administer it. And what it does is it kind of pinpoints what that is. So the Florida Oral Reading Fluency Assessment, if you just Google it, all kinds of tools will come up. And honestly, because they aren't really made for adults, it doesn't really matter. From the ones that I've seen, it doesn't matter which specific one you use, but what does matter is that you're figuring out what's happening with the student when they're reading. You're figuring out if the student is not fluent because of vocabulary, or maybe they're not fluent because they don't know what to do when they get to a new word that they don't recognize, or maybe they're not fluent because they just lack the phonic skills to understand how to get to those new words. And so once students have that phonemic awareness and phonic skills and are able to read fluently and are able to learn vocabulary and vocabulary skills, then they can get to comprehension. So I don't like to, I did a training for Read San Diego last year, and the whole room was full of folks who, you know, it was supposed to be this session, but a whole lot of folks were in the room were working with very low learners, or with students who were from the refugee population who weren't reading in their own languages and had very, very low skills. And so we actually completely did that session over to talk about these other pieces, because their students weren't anywhere close to comprehension. So I said all of that to say that if you're working with students on comprehension and you're giving them activity after activity and they don't seem to be improving even with using these strategies, you might need to go backwards and look at some of the other components of reading that might be a struggle for them. Okay, so I'm going to leave the comments alone for a little bit because it's actually a little bit distracting and I don't want to lose my train of thought because I only have so much time. Okay, so one thing that I think is important to understand the tools that effective readers use. And one of the first things is that effective users monitor their understanding as they're reading. Many of you out there listening, you've read things, maybe you've gone back to school for something, or you read something in a technical journal or research article. If you read it and you don't understand it the first time, you pay attention to the fact that you're not understanding what you're reading. A lot of our learners don't do that. A lot of them go through reading just to get through the reading and not because they're really focusing on comprehension. So effective readers monitor their understanding or monitor their comprehension. And if they don't comprehend something, they go back so that they can you know, use another tool to figure out how to understand what it is that they're reading. How can you get students to have good comprehension when they're mouth readers and it slows down their understanding? So okay, I'll get to that question. So other things that effective readers do is they make predictions as they're reading. What do they expect is going to happen? They ask questions when they're reading. They ask, is this related to something that I've experienced? Or I wonder if this concept is connected to another concept that I've learned about. They clarify. They might say, okay, the author says this, and this is what this means for me. They may summarize, or they evaluate it. Is this true, or does this sound like this might be based on a false premise? And then they also make connections between what they already know, or what they've already read, or what they've already learned or experienced, and what it is that they're reading. So those same strategies that are used by effective learners, we want our students to begin developing those strategies. So let's get to some of the strategies. Now, most of these strategies are all things that you can do before reading to prepare students and help their comprehension during reading and also after reading. So I'll describe those. So this first tool I like to use with students, whether I'm working at Seeds of Literacy, where we work with students in a one-on-one setting. I've also taught students in a classroom setting, and I like using this tool for a lot of reasons, even in professional development, because what it does is it gets students to think about what they already know about a topic, which means it activates their prior learning, which is one of the research-based practices that I like to use. We're working with adults who already have a lot of experiences, and so sometimes they can bring a lot of knowledge to the topic. Secondly,
sometimes adults think they understand something, but their understanding may be a little bit incorrect. And using the KWL organizer allows that to bubble up, and so we can kind of investigate if their understanding was correct. The first example I can think of is a student who we were starting a lesson on order of operations, and that's mathematics, but it's the same idea. When I asked if they were familiar with, what do they know about order of operations, the one young lady raised her hand and said, "Isn't that please excuse my sister Mary thing?" And everyone started laughing because we realized that she kind of remembered some things, but she remembered it incorrectly. So using the KWL organizer as a group or one-on-one with a student, the first thing that you do is you get them to start brainstorming what they might already know about a topic. And in brainstorming what they already know about a topic, it gets them to think about what they know. And for students who don't really have anything to contribute, that's fine, because they're starting to at least hear some things that may have sounded familiar, and it just gets them involved. I prefer active engagement with students so that they're not passively just trying to take information, but they're a part of helping to generate and create it. So this brings the students in right away. The next thing is, once you start listing things, you can start asking, well, what do you want to know? And so for this whole entire presentation, I'm going to use the example of the Civil War lesson, because that's one area that I really like to study with students. And so students might list that they know that it has something to do with slavery, it might have to do with states' rights, or what have you. So they start listing those things, but then there might be students who say, you know, I don't know what states' rights is, or what exactly is secession. So we put those questions in, what do you want to know about the topic? The thing about that what do you want to know topic is that then when they start reading about it, they already have a goal, they already have a focus, they already have a purpose for learning. So they're going to go into that learning activity with a job. I need to answer this question. And you can take those questions and divide them between groups of students so that they're working collaboratively to read through and look for the answers to those questions. And then we go back to learn. So the learn column focuses on what do students gain through that process. And now this could be places for them to take notes while they're learning. It could be places for them to look at the answers to write the answers to the questions that they were searching for. It can be their way of making connections. And I really like using this because it really, again, is an active learning strategy, and it gets students involved in creating knowledge. One thing I like to do is just get those huge poster paper and put K on one side of the room and W on one side and L on another, or maybe do 2 or 3 of them, in fact, and then just have students go crazy and write about them, and then have someone report out what they already know, the things that they already know, questions that they might have, and then what they've learned at the end of it. So that's the first strategy, getting students to use the KWL organizer. Now, I will say this too. So we're talking about 10 different strategies. Think of these about 10 different tools that you have in your toolkit as an educator, and don't feel like you have to use all 10 of them at one time. And then so I'll also say too that when people are thinking about using graphic organizers, I think it's really important to explain to students the concept behind the graphic organizer. The concept behind this one is to think about what you already know, to focus on the things that you want to know so that you can determine your purpose for learning, and then to put what you've learned, which if students have these for different things that they're learning, so let's say they're focused using KWL for all of their science and social studies content, when they're ready to review for their test, they can go back to that L column and use that as a way of reviewing the content that they've covered. But if they understand the purpose of the tool, it makes the tool useful and not just a glorified way of note-taking, which I find a lot of people, when I do observations, a lot of people do use it just for note-taking. Okay, so moving on to strategy 2. Strategy 2, good old Abraham Lincoln. This strategy is called Brainstorm, Organize, and Label. And basically, again, it's another way of activating students' prior knowledge. What do they already know? And so you get them to brainstorm everything that they can think of. And I like to use images as well, because sometimes you can talk about, let's say the Civil War or the Union soldiers or Confederate soldier, and people don't necessarily know exactly, may not remember what that is, but if you give them an image from history, they connect to that image, particularly our visual learners who will remember something that they've seen. They may not remember what it is, but they can tell you exactly where it was on the page and what color the ink was and all that kind of thing. So use that learning style to their advantage. So the students brainstorm. They think of everything that they can think of related to that topic. And then they organize that brainstorm into different categories. So these are things that are related with soldiers, and these are things that are related with states' rights, and these are things that are related with whatever. So they organize those brainstorm activities, which gets them to makes them classify and think about how those things are how those concepts are related. So then they organize them, and then they label them. And then they use those labels to help organize the information. So then when they're reading, they already have a frame for fitting in what they're reading about. All right, so brainstorm, organize, and label. This is one of my absolute favorite activities. It's called Take a Stand, and it can be used as pre and post, but I like to use it for a pre-activity and a post-activity. So this is one in the KWL that I'll use as a pre and post within the same lesson, and here's why. So the pre-strategy is I actually make a number line in the classroom where I'll post strongly agree and strongly disagree on opposite walls. And so I'll give students statements. So for this example, with the Civil War, one of the statements might be the Civil War was waged because of slavery. And then I ask the students to place themselves on that continuum with whether they strongly agree or strongly disagree. It gets them up and makes them become more active. They're moving around the classroom. They're kind of thinking about where they actually stand on an issue. So it makes them really think about that issue or to connect to that statement. It doesn't have to be a controversial statement. It can be a fact. You can use this for any content area, including math. You might say something like, anytime the bigger denominator is, the smaller the size of a piece, right? Any thought at all, any statement at all you can use for this. So the students place themselves where they are, and then I start asking questions. Okay, so why do you think you're a 3? Why are you a 3? If you're a 5, why are you a 5? And so the students start using their prior knowledge and talking about and defending what it is. And it can actually be really fun for them, and they do enjoy it. I've had students before say, well, I didn't really know anything about this, but he seems pretty smart, so I'm standing by him. That's fine at the pre-level. And the post-level, we're hoping that they have they're standing there for their own reasons. But what this does is it makes students really begin to think and evaluate. And sometimes during that conversation, they start to reconsider. Another wonderful thing, what comes up in that conversation? Vocabulary words. So it gives you an opportunity to say, if someone says, oh, well, I think it was more about secession, and we can say, well, what is secession? And so the students are learning from one another's knowledge. And if they don't know, then it gives me an opportunity to basically formatively assess what they do or don't know in the beginning. And then I can start defining things for them. So we ask those questions, and students have a chance to move around and think and consider. And what it does is it start giving them some background information for this. Background information is an extremely important part of comprehension. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Okay, so this one is kind of similar to strategy 2, but it basically focuses on the idea of schema. Schema is something that we get from the work of Jean Piaget, and basically he said that our brain is kind of like a filing system. And the more we know, the more we understand, the more sophisticated our learning becomes, the more sophisticated our categories become. So for example, a child may see a dog and see that, a little child might see a dog and see that animal, and mom might say, that's a doggy, and the kid sees it and they got doggy. And then they go to Aunt Sarah's, and Aunt Sarah has a cat, and her cat comes through, and here's a 4-legged creature with fur. It must be a doggy. The kid says, yes, it's a doggy. Mom says, no, that's a cat. And so the kid starts to realize that, okay, so this category of furry things can be cats or dogs. And so they become more refined in their thinking. So an example from the screen is that union. Students typically know what union means. I'm sorry, I just gave my cat a chance to enter the story. Typically, students have an idea of what union is defined, but union has a different meaning when we're talking about the Civil War. So for this strategy, students, you give students the categories. So in the previous one, they brainstorm. But if you get to a topic and the students aren't able to brainstorm things, then you give them a list of words, vocabulary words that may be related. You could actually have students define these words first so that they're thinking about the definitions, because again, if a student doesn't understand the vocabulary, they're not going to get the comprehension. So this gives you an opportunity to get that vocabulary, to address the vocabulary needs that students have. So they define the words, and then they sort the words according to 4 themes that you've identified. So for this example, they would take abolition and say, is abolition a cause of the war? Is it something related to the North? Is it something related to the South? Or was it something related to the battle itself? And so again, what it's doing is it's giving students an opportunity to take the information that they have and then sort it into categories. And what that's useful for later is for note taking. So then as they begin taking more notes, they can say, okay, this is also a concept that's related to a cause of the war. And yes, I just noticed someone said that this is a good assessment tool too. It is a very good formative assessment tool because it lets you know what do they already know and what can I go from. And the one thing about assessing adults for prior knowledge is that it really does acknowledge that you are not a blank slate. We tend to think of children that way too, and they really aren't. But these are not blank slates. These are people who have knowledge and experiences. So the next strategy is notable quotables. So one of the things I've noticed about the new high school equivalency assessments, if you've looked at the practice questions that are available by the publishers, one of the first things that you'll notice is that they expect students to understand the key people in history and the eras. There is this huge assumption of prior knowledge. And so one of the things that I like to do is to get students to connect a person to an era. So in other words, they're not thinking that Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln, though they both talked about freedom, they're not thinking that okay, so Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln lived at the same time. They understand that they were in different eras, but talking about the same content area. So I like this strategy. And what it does is you take a quote from someone. And now here's the other thing about the HSC assessment is that they use the materials that are available in the public domain, which means all of this stuff is 72 years old or older. And a lot of the publishers use that as well. And understandably, because it makes it easier for us to afford the materials, right? So because of that, students need to have opportunities to see that language in class. They need to practice with that language and become familiar with that way of speaking. So I like to use these quotes for that as well. So essentially what happens is I put the quote on the board, and then I get the students to start making inferences about Abraham Lincoln based on what the quote says. What did he care about? What were his values? Are there any themes that pop out of this quote? So I use that as a way to start getting students to think about their prior knowledge as well. So it's just taking that quote and giving students a task to try to think about what was happening during the time period that Abraham Lincoln wrote this, and how did what was happening at that time period influence his views. So it's just kind of another way of helping to bring in background knowledge and helping students to actually get excited about a topic and to give them some background information before they begin reading. Strategy 6 is getting students to annotate or provide short summaries. I was working with a student one evening. We were shorthanded in terms of our tutors, and so I stepped into the classroom and I was working with a student who was reading a passage about Houdini. And in that passage so he read the whole page, and I asked him, I said, well, I'm just going to sit here. I have some reading myself to do, but if you have any questions, let me know. So when I noticed that he finished, I asked, well, what did you read, or what do you understand about what it is that you've read? And he said that, and so he looked and he was kind of thinking about it, and he was like, you know what, I'm not even gonna lie, I have no idea what I just read, which, made a lot of sense to me. So I went back and I said, what I want you to do now is I just want you to read the first paragraph. You read the first paragraph, and then I want you to write a 3 or 4, oops, my slide advanced, I'm sorry. I just want you to write a 3 or 4 word summary about what that paragraph is. So he would write, usually it's more like 4 to 6 words for him, but he would write a 4 to 6 word summary about what it is that he understood. And then once he wrote that summary, he would go on to the next paragraph. And so then once he wrote the summary for the next paragraph, I would ask him to tell me the story from the beginning to the end. So here was the story about Houdini, then he was a magician, and so on and so on. So once he got to the end of the page, he had a better understanding of what it is that he read because he'd been focusing on understanding each paragraph. Sometimes a whole passage is too much for a student. So what we did after that is we looked, so he'd already annotated. Annotating is just kind of writing notes, right? Sometimes we might write questions, or we might underline something, we might highlight something, we might write our own explanation for something. But what he was able to do is he was able to summarize that passage using just the words, just the summaries in the margins of the paper. Then once he did that, I asked him if he could go back with a highlighter and just highlight where in the text he saw that was the main idea. And so he went back and he highlighted, and I'm pretty sure you're already jumping to this conclusion, but I asked him, well, what do you notice about what it is that you are seeing? Like, are you seeing any pattern in your highlighting? And he said, yeah, everything I'm highlighting is in the first or second sentence, which was a wonderful lesson because we can then go back to that for writing, that yes, we typically make our main point in the first 1 or 2 sentences. And then we looked at what are in the sentences that follow, that some are examples. And he annotated that. He wrote in the margin, these are examples. Here is an explanation. Here is some data. So it's helping students to engage with the text on a deeper level than just trying to get through it and answer the questions. So let me just say really quickly that one of the things that we have to understand about our students is that they have been coping for so long. They have been using strategies to cover the fact that they struggle with reading for so long. They are so good at guessing. They're amazing at guessing. They have incredible tools for navigating this world with lower literacy skills. And one of the things that they're really good at is learning how to find the answers even without understanding something. So one of the things that I noticed is that, I was working with one young lady, and she would read, and then when I would ask her questions, she would reach for the packet. Lunge for the packet. And if she didn't have it in front of her, she didn't know if she could make sense out of what it is that she was reading, because she's so used to getting the answers. And I'm telling you, I think one of the things that we're talking to our tutors about, or training our tutors to do now, is to not allow students to have the questions in front of them and to try to get them to construct their knowledge from the passage that they're reading. And so this strategy helps them to do that because it makes them really interact with the text on a more intimate level. Okay, so strategy 7 is using peer-to-peer interaction. And that is really just giving students an opportunity to talk to one another. When you and I read, we ask questions of ourselves. We might have a conversation with the author. Like I might say to an author, well, why didn't you make a connection between what you wrote in chapter 7 and this concept here? It seems like they're related. So this peer-to-peer interaction is just giving students an opportunity to do that with one another. And I do this 2 ways. The first thing is I might give them questions that I want them to focus on as they're reading something, so that they have to talk to one another about those questions. And I don't use questions that they can answer from the passage. I try to use questions that require them to do some critical thinking. So I might say, okay, you're reading this passage about Abraham Lincoln and about how, he has all of these issues and he's trying to make all of these people happy. Can you think about a situation in your life where you were trying to make a decision that would please 2 people who had different viewpoints or different goals or different objectives? And so I try to give them questions that make them really look at the text, reflect on an experience, so they can have a better understanding of what is actually happening in the text. The other thing that I like to do is ask students to generate questions themselves. They're very good at generating questions. And if they have the job of writing questions, it puts them in the frame of the folks who make the questions that they answer. So they start thinking about things a little bit differently. And so if I ask students to generate questions themselves, then as a group, we answer those questions as a class, and they have to go back to the text and provide evidence of when they saw it. And so the students are helping to create the knowledge, and they're also helping to create the assessment that they're using. Okay, strategy number 8, rereading. And this one sounds like a no-brainer, but let me tell you, our students don't know that we reread. They think that we pick up everything, that we read it, we understand it, and we move on. They don't know that sometimes we read something and we don't necessarily get it, and we go back and reread it again for ourselves. And so because they don't know it, they don't do it. But think about it. We do this in everything. If you're watching something on TV and you miss something, you grab the remote, you go back, you watch it again, right? You're listening to a song that you like, you don't quite understand the lyric, you might go back and listen to the song again. We do the same thing with reading. If you don't understand something, go back, read it again. Maybe just read 1 paragraph or 1 or 2 sentences. Try to get a sense of that comprehension before you go back and try to make sense out of what it is that you're reading. Go back to it and use some of these strategies to try to dig deeper and figure out what it is that you're reading. Strategy number 9 is creating a mind map or a story map. And for this, I go back to my visual learners. Visual learners, that was nice, thank you. So visual learners think in pictures. And if there are any of you out there who are visual learners, this will probably really resonate with you. So visual learners think in pictures. That means if you teach them about something, they're creating an image in their mind of what that looks like. They're creating a concept mind in their mind of what that looks like. And when you go to ask them about that, they actually go back and retrieve those pictures, and then they translate it back to you verbally. And what this looks like in class is, so I'm the verbal kid. I'm the kid that words and letters are just, they are my playground, right? So if a teacher asks me a question verbally, I already have a verbal response ready because I don't have to retrieve it. It's already stored in my mind in words. Visual learners store those things in pictures. So when you ask a question in class, your verbal learners are the, ooh, I know the answer students, right? Your visual students are the students who are waiting back and not answering right away because they're translating it. So sometimes we think that those students are slower, and it's not that they're slower, they're processing it differently, and it takes up a little bit more time. So if you have students who are visual, use their learning style to their advantage and have them map out what they're reading. If they're using a narrative story, what is the background? What is the rising action? What is the complex, the climax? What is the denouement or following action? What is the resolution? If it's a historical story, what are the causes? What was the effect? Or even a timeline. When did this happen? Who were the key players? It can be a flow chart in science. If this is mitosis and this is meiosis, this happens in this step and then this happens, but in meiosis, this happens, in mitosis, that happens. It helps students to make the distinction between two things that are actually similar, and it gives them something visual to connect to where they may not remember exactly what you said, but they can picture it. In fact, your visual learners will even speak visually, like they'll say, oh, I can't see that, or I can't picture that, right? So having students actually draw that out can be really helpful. And I believe in using images and introducing a lot of stuff in images anyway, because again, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So a student can see a picture and already begin making some connections to what it is that they see visually. Okay, so 8 minutes to go, so I gotta kind of see through this. So the strategy number 10 is a post-reading strategy, and that is to get students to, now that you've read this, tell me 3 key ideas from this strategy. What that does is it makes them go back to what they've read, and it makes them focus. It makes them focus on what it is that they've just learned, which is really good because we have this thing that we don't always think about. It's called the forgetting cycle, right? So we start reading something and then we walk away from it and then we start to forget. But asking students to think about 3 key things makes them focus on remembering what was important from what it is that they've read. And another thing that I might add is that it's nice to ask students about those 3 key ideas before you start the next lesson. So let's say you're focusing on the Civil War and they may talk about 3 key things that they remember from that. Before you go on to the next lesson, ask them if they remember the 3 key things from the first lesson, because our lessons are kind of siloed. We focus on this, and then we focus on this, and we focus on that. And because of that, students don't always make connections across history or across scientific concepts. They don't see those relations. And what we're trying to do is get them to develop as thinkers, to get them to develop as critical thinkers. And critical thinkers aren't siloed. Critical thinkers focus on, are you guys still there? Oh, okay. Can you guys hear me still?
We can. We just need share screen.
Okay. All right. Let me see. I'm sorry. I don't know what just happened there, but okay. So getting students to focus, go back to those 3 key strategies, makes them make connections between different content. So they understand how the Civil War was related to the next social studies lesson, or they see how one science concept is related to the next concept, or they see how skills build on one another in math and other content areas. So I like getting students to think about those 3 key ideas because it forces them to take something away from that lesson, and then it forces them to think about that, recall that again when you ask again, what do you remember? And then if they know that you're going to ask them about what they remember, they start to come prepared with that because they don't want to not have the answers for you. So so that's the 10th strategy. I'm going to revisit strategy number 1 because I think that, so once the students have learned the content, so let's say that if I'm giving a lesson with students, also, here's another point. If I'm giving students a lesson, I try to give them lessons that are at different levels. So for example, if we're doing a lesson on the Civil War, if I have some students who are really at the high end and some students at the really low end, I don't want to give them the same passage because the students who are at the low end may not be able to access it, or the students who are at the higher end may not be challenged. So I try to find different perspectives. So we might look at a Union soldier's diary, we might look at a Confederate soldier's diary, we might look at the diary of a former slaveholder, we might look at Abraham Lincoln's thoughts, And so the students are able to all become experts on a different aspect or component of the Civil War, but from different perspectives, and those different perspectives allow me to have different levels of complexity in the text. So the students don't know that they have different complexity, they just know that they're responsible for different content area, which allows you to kind of differentiate your instruction for the diversity of your learners without making it very obvious that they're at different levels. But then they each become experts on their specific topic. So then when we have a conversation about that topic, they're all contributing different things and they're all learning from one another, and they leave with a much broader view of that topic than they would if we were just reading one passage. So I like to go back and then say, okay, so what have we learned? And what I do is I go back to the K column first. So what do we think we knew? Because this is where you'll get to things that maybe a student thought they understood it, but they didn't know it completely. And we might actually cross off some things that we thought we knew that wasn't actually correct. Then we look at the what did we want to know? Have we answered all of the questions that we had for ourselves? Or do we still have some questions that we need to figure out? And that's a great tool. And sometimes it's a question that I don't have the answer to, and then we have to Google, because it's good for them to know we don't have all of the answers. And then we look at what we've learned. And again, it allows them to look at what they understand about this topic that they either knew a little bit about or maybe had some misconceptions about. It kind of summarizes it, and it shows them that it gives them a purpose. I see that I thought I knew this, I wanted to know this, and now I've learned all these things. So they see the conclusion, they see the full circle in the time that they've spent in class. Okay, so the next slide is revisiting the take a stand. And this one I really like too, because especially if it's a topic that there was a lot of energy and discussion around, students will change. They may shift their position, and they like to call each other on shifting their position. Oh, you were a 5 before, you strongly disagreed, but now you agree. And which I think is actually a good thing. I wish our politicians could do that. Like, yes, when you learn and you know more, you might make a different decision, right? So it gives them a chance to talk about why they've changed. It gives them to start thinking about evidence. It starts connecting them, and which is what we need them to do with their writing, right? So I like to use that as a pre and post, because it gives us a chance to revisit what they thought they knew or understood. And honestly, you can do the take a stand and KWL together. And I've done that together, and the students actually love it, no matter what topic we're working on. It's just a good way to see that. The last thing, if anyone has to go right at 3 o'clock, feel free. I have just, I think, 3 or 4 more slides. But here's the one thing that I really want you to understand, if nothing else. The best tool that you have for helping adult literacy learners is yourself, because you have a thought process that it's invisible to you. You don't see it anymore because it's so automatic to you, but it's not automatic to our learners. And so sometimes I'll ask people, have you ever have someone who just is really, really intelligent, that you like talking to them because when you talk to them, it makes you think differently and you feel smarter? Be that to your students. Help them understand how you see a topic, yes, someone says, I do, we do, you do. Yes, absolutely. Help them to see how you're processing. So you might say, well, I see that the heading says this, and I see that the subheadings say that. So that tells me that this is probably going to be about 1, 2, and 3. So once we model that, and we model it enough, students hear that, and then they start to repeat it. Even when I'm working with students on phonics, even if I use a tiny, device in phonics, the students will start telling me that. Okay, so I know that UMP is and if I add a B to it, okay, so what is it? And they'll think through, and they'll start making their own process, which is exactly what we want. We want them to develop the thinking skills and the processing skills and the problem solving skills that will allow them to get through all of this content. So make your process visible. If you reread, let them know that you reread. If you know a certain fact and you're making a certain assumption, make sure they know that assumption. Be really open to them about your process, because it really does help them learn how to learn and learn how to think and learn how to process. So a couple really quick things. I think it's really important to build background knowledge for students, because when we read, we make connections to things that we already know. So anytime I introduce any lesson, I like to give some background first. Sometimes I'll use a quick video, or I might use a short story, or I might use an excerpt from a story or an audio book to give students some kind of background information, so that when they're reading, I've already given them something to make connections to. So building background knowledge is important. I believe in incorporating images with text, because some students are very visual, and it really does help to support that. teaching vocabulary as well as vocabulary skills is also important for comprehension. Students need to know not just words and definitions, but how to use the text to figure out definitions for themselves. We could do a whole webinar on just that. And then using the structure of patterns, the structure, organization, and patterns. So if this is if this is a cause and effect story, it's going to have a very different structure and purpose than a compare and contrast frame or than a narrative frame. So use those, help students learn how to use those frames to figure out what their purpose is, right? We know if we're reading a persuasive text that we need to really evaluate this because this person's trying to convince us on something. And we want to make sure that we're weighing their arguments and evaluating the validity of their argument. So using those structures and patterns. One quick story, I worked with a young lady who was reading a story about this girl who was walking across the street. She walked past the farmer's market. She saw this red delicious apple and a sea of Granny Smith apples, and she got so distracted that she didn't see the trolley coming. She got hit by the trolley and ended up in the emergency room. So when I asked the student if she could tell me about the story, she couldn't tell me anything about it. So I asked her, well, do you know what a farmer's market is? She didn't know what a farmer's market was. Well, it's going to be hard to situate that story in a context if you don't know what a farmer's market is. Do you know what a Granny Smith apple is? No. Do you know what a Red Delicious apple is? No. Well, then that wouldn't, then you will have no understanding of why that would be a distracting sight at a farmer's market, which you also don't know about. Do you know what a trolley is? No. Then there's no context for you to understand that a trolley is a vehicle, and that if you get hit by a trolley, yeah, you're probably going to end up in an emergency room. So building comprehension is building background knowledge is really critical for comprehension, and we do need to pay attention to that. And then again, use as many of the senses as possible. Our brains, the more senses we use, the more different areas of our brains are activated in learning and recall. They've done studies where they talk about how if you give a student, if they see the word lick, the areas of the brain for retrieval and the areas of the brain for licking are activated just from recall, even if you're not actually doing the act of anything. So all of these are strategies to really try to get students to use their entire bodies and their entire brains in learning. All of those are keys to comprehension, but just keep in mind that there are strategies that we can use before students read to prepare them for what we're reading, during the reading, and then after their reading to try to interrupt that forgetting cycle. And I think that is my last slide. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any that pop up. Someone did ask about getting the slide presentation. It will be in the repository. Thank you all for your comments. This is really, really nice. I enjoyed spending this time with you, and I think that's all. They're ready for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Carmen. I'm going to turn this over to Robert to say a few final words, and then we'll end the presentation.
Wow, I want to see a show of hands of folks who thought that was just fantastic. Dr. Stewart, I have done tons of these, and I have learned so much. I want to go to the archive page and definitely view this again. I thought it was fantastic. So again, thanks to all with COABE. We're so thrilled to sponsor these. And again, if you're looking for places to do fiction, nonfiction, all these reading strategies, everything you've done, you can find them at BurlingtonEnglish. Really high interest, really being able to bring out the best in your readers. And also something folks often miss when they're looking at our program for the first time is we do have wonderful academic strategies that are highlighted and very easy to navigate for both teachers and students. Really bring out the best. Main ideas, topic sentences, supporting details, everything that makes up all that CCRS is bringing to us. And you can find that all in, again, very highly engaging reading passages. And so again, thank you from all of us at Burlington English. We'll see you on our website. And with that, I'll turn it back to our friends at COABE. Thanks to everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. Thank you so much, Bethel, for being available and providing the technical assistance on the back end. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you on the next webinar. Bye now.